Hello, this is BBC World News. I'm Krupa Bhatia. Top stories. As the Amazon burns, Brazil's president denies his policies are to blame. He's authorised troops to fight the fires. Getting down to business in Biarritz. The G7 summit set to start in the glamorous French resort, but can leaders overcome their differences? President Trump steps up the trade war with Beijing, slapping further tariffs on Chinese imports. And no passport? No problem. New technology could make travel documents a thing of the past. Hello and welcome to BBC News. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has bowed to international pressure and authorised the armed forces to tackle a record number of fires in the Amazon forest. In a televised address, he said that wildfires could happen in any country and shouldn't be used as an excuse for international sanctions. Now, the fires are scattered widely across the Amazon, most notably in the north of Brazil. John McManus has the latest.
Blue skies and sandy beaches, but as leaders from the G7 nations gather in Biarritz, the French President Emmanuel Macron has promised to put the burning Amazon at the top of the agenda. This is his and many of the leaders' concern. Thousands of fires in the Amazon basin, far more than usual at this time of year. Devouring trees and undergrowth, described as the lungs of the planet, they're releasing even more climate-changing carbon into the atmosphere. Mr. Macron says the scale of the impact requires an international response. France and Ireland have threatened not to ratify the EU's trade deal with Brazil and the other Mercosur countries if Brazil doesn't take action. That threat hasn't gone down well with Brazil's leader, who's accused Mr. Macron of holding a colonialist mentality.
All
the countries have expressed solidarity with Brazil. They have offered to help tackle the wildfires and have also offered to take Brazil's position to the G7 meeting. Wildfires can happen anywhere, and they should not be used as a pretext for international sanctions.
And though he won't be at the G7 meeting, Mr. Bolsonaro might be able to count on the support of Donald Trump, who will be there. The two men admire each other. But President Bolsonaro will now deploy troops to fight the fires and says he'll crack down on illegal deforestation. That's not a promise to end clearances, but his change of tone has been welcomed by some.
It was a very significant change from what he's been saying up until now. He seems to now be taking the situation very seriously. He's clearly hearing the message, not only from world leaders, but actually from, I think, hundreds of millions of people on social media, including tens of millions of people in Brazil.
Mr. Bolsonaro's neighbours have also been turning up the heat. Across Latin America, angry demonstrators have gathered outside Brazil's embassies.
I feel very sad because the earth is our mother and what is happening in Brazil. The president of Brazil needs to stop the fires. We live from the earth because she is the one who gives us food.
Even with dedicated troops, it will take an enormous effort to stop these fires in their tracks. Other countries have offered practical support, but nobody's quite sure yet whether Brazil's president needs or indeed wants that helping hand. John McManus, BBC News.
Let's stick with this story. Luisa Lima is from Greenpeace in Brazil, and she says that the president hasn't gone far enough in his plans for tackling the flames.
Since Bolsonaro took office, he has been dismantling the country's environmental policy. He has made several statements that only encourage criminal practice against the environment and bring harm to the country. The numbers of forest fire increased by 145% this year when compared to the same period last year. So it's hard for us to say that it's just caused by a dry season. Like it's definitely caused by his anti-environmental policy. We regret that we have come to this situation. as who is going to suffer the most is the Brazilian population. Nevertheless, any statement that says that this international pressure can be a colonialist imprint, or that this is the one that it's blaming that it's causing a damage in Brazilians' image is true. It is only a tentative to blame those who are denouncing the environmental problems caused by his own administration.
Well, the issue of the Amazon fires is likely to be addressed at this weekend's G7 summit in France. And another subject that will be on the agenda is the global economy. And as President Trump boarded Air Force One headed for that summit, he threatened to tax French wine if France imposed taxes on US tech companies. It's another headache for the host, French President Macron, who wants to use the meeting of the leaders of the world's major economies to revive the international rules-based order. Rose Atkins sent this report from Biarritz.
Lots of people come to Biarritz to take it easy, and you can see why. President Macron, though, is arriving with an ultra-ambitious agenda for the G7. Top of it is tackling global inequality, but within that you'll find education, climate change, healthcare, tax, trade, digitisation and security, all in 3 days, all being discussed by a group of leaders described by one commentator as political nitroglycerine. So we'll see how they get on with the issues, but it's unlikely to be dull. Biarritz is used to hosting tourists, but across this weekend it's also got to host around 13,000 security personnel. You'll see these vans everywhere. It's also going to host the latest instalment in a grand battle over the future of the global economy and of global politics. Take free trade, for example. Donald Trump doesn't like it. He started a trade war with China, and he says Europe's worse than China. Look too at what Emmanuel Macron's been saying about the wildfires in the Amazon. He's tweeted to call it an international crisis. Brazil's president's replied essentially saying, mind your own business. And this tension between national and global perspectives is seen all around the world at the moment, and we'll see it here too. Then there's Donald Trump himself. 2 years ago at the G20 in Hamburg, he refused to sign a climate change agreement with everyone else. And then, as I'm sure you remember, this was the image of the G7 in Canada last year. Mr. Trump ended up leaving early, and he called Justin Trudeau weak and dishonest. Now, given that the American president cancelled a trip to Denmark this week, all to do with his idea to buy Greenland, I'm making no predictions as to what happens next. All of which helps to explain why this summit, which takes place in the blue and white building over there, will not produce a joint communique. It's just not possible. And so we have the G7, which began life in the 1970s as a series of intimate conversations between leaders, now in a much, much more public way, showing us all powerful nations grappling with big issues and often with each other.
And there'll be plenty more from Roz throughout the course of the weekend from that summit. And you'll find more on the G7 summit on our BBC News website, including more on who will be there, what's on the agenda, and the latest analysis from our correspondents. That's also available on our BBC News app as well. President Trump has intensified America's trade dispute with China by ordering US firms to do business elsewhere. The call in a series of angry tweets came in response to the latest Chinese tariffs to be imposed on American goods. Later, Mr. Trump announced he would further increase trade tariffs against China. As our North America correspondent David Willis reports.
As the dispute between the world's two largest economies deepened, the financial markets took fright. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones closed down more than 600 points. Donald Trump's personal rapport with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping belies a simmering trade dispute between the two nations, which, the longer it drags on, increasingly threatens to impact the global economy. Incensed by China's move to impose tit-for-tat tariffs on billions of dollars of American exports, President Trump railed against the Chinese on Twitter. They've stolen our intellectual property at a rate of hundreds of billions of dollars a year, he wrote, and they want to continue. I won't let that happen. We don't need China, and frankly, would be far better off without them. And he followed up with this. Our great American companies are hereby ordered to immediately start looking for an alternative to China, including bringing your companies home and making your products in the USA. If there's one man who irritates the president almost as much as the Chinese, it's Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve, America's equivalent of the central bank. He doesn't account to the president, nor does he share Donald Trump's enthusiasm for lowering interest rates. But tetchy though their relationship has become in recent months, it's unlikely that Mr. Powell saw this coming. My only question is, wrote the president, who is our bigger enemy, Jay Powell or President Xi? Once the financial markets here had closed for the day, President Trump announced he was increasing tariffs on billions of dollars of Chinese goods by an additional 5%, putting the tax on some imports at 30% from the start of October. There is no greater priority for a president seeking re-election than the state of the American economy. Amid talk of a possible slowdown, factors outside of his control are clearly proving deeply frustrating. David Willis, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Do stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come. The healing power of the past, the indigenous communities connecting with their ancestors in the search for health and happiness.
Fall in love with thousands of brands with Prime Wardrobe.
Hello, this is BBC World News. These are your latest headlines. Brazil's president has ordered the military to help fight devastating fires in the Amazon amid mounting international pressure. President Trump has stepped up the trade war with Beijing, slapping further tariffs on Chinese imports. A worker at Britain's consulate in Hong Kong who was detained by the Chinese authorities has been released. Simon Cheng went missing earlier this month during a business trip to mainland China. Well, let's get more on this with the BBC's Stephen McDonald, who joins us now from Hong Kong. Stephen, he made this announcement that he'd been released on Facebook. What more did we learn?
So Simon Cheng, who works for the British consulate, was due to arrive here at Kowloon West train station 15 days ago. He messaged his girlfriend saying he was coming back from his day trip to the mainland and about to cross the border, inverted commas, inside this building. Now, the way the system works here is that is the frontier. The train station inside is technically mainland Chinese territory. They had to pass a law when the high-speed train service opened to make it that. So he didn't come through, though. He didn't leave the train station and re-enter Hong Kong. Instead, he disappeared. Now, we've been told by the police in Shenzhen, that's the city just across the border on the mainland from here, that Simon Cheng was held for 15 days and that he admitted his guilt, although they didn't say what it is that he's admitted to being guilty of having done. And a group on social media that had been set up to support Simon Cheng said that he had arrived back in the city, that he's with his family, he wants to rest now before speaking to the media at some point in the future. Interestingly, his employer, the British consulate, has not had independent confirmation yet that he has in fact been released.
So lots of question marks clearly there, Stephen. The background to all of this, he is a worker at the UK consulate there in Hong Kong, where there have been pro-democracy protests in recent weeks, some very violent. We're seeing pictures from our various newswires indicating that more protests may have begun there this weekend. What more can you tell us?
Yes, well, of course, his case goes without saying, put a lot of pressure on the Britain-China relationship, especially after Beijing had told Britain to not get involved in what it says is now China's internal affairs, that Hong Kong now has nothing to do with Britain, and having a staff member from the British consulate detained in this way has put a lot of strain on that relationship. But yes, protests are underway again today. Another interesting aspect of that, though, is that these protests today are legal. They've been given permission by the police, and yet the city's underground train system operator, having come under quite a lot of pressure from mainland China's Communist Party controlled media, has stopped services to the line where those protests are happening. Now, according to state-controlled media on mainland China, the MTR company here had kind of colluded with protesters or something along those lines. Well, following that pressure, this is a perfectly legal demonstration, and yet all the stations along the route which are anywhere near where that demonstration is happening today have been stopped, and it does appear to most observers that that is Hong Kong's transport operator caving into that pressure from mainland Chinese media.
Interesting, a story that we shall be watching closely throughout the day. Thanks very much, Stephen, there in Hong Kong. Now, we've all had that terrifying moment where you're getting ready to go on holiday and you think you've lost your passport, but new technology could make remembering to carry your travel documents a thing of the past. Instead, the passport would be saved on your phone and detected by a biometric scanner at the border. Our business reporter Simon Browning has been trying it out.
Sunshine, holidays, city breaks. We all love our trips away. And it's the time of year when flights are full, airports are bursting, and there can be lots of waiting around.
Now, we all know what it's like to arrive on holiday at your destination, to arrive in the passport hall and be greeted by queues to get your passport scanned. They're a nightmare, 30 minutes an hour. Well, new technology means they could be a thing of the past when our passports go onto our phones.
This kiosk is called Protect. It's the start of a contactless ID system designed by a group of companies and academics to speed up our transition across borders.
So let's start with the kiosk enrolment. If you can select English.
After downloading an app to your phone, you register your passport with it just once.
We now ask you to present your passport, your document onto the reader. Now it's going to ask you just to look into the camera, and this is just simply to make a match between the passport photo and your live image. So your identity has now been verified, so the link has been established. In a moment, this will be confirmed on the screen. This has now been done, and your mobile phone now says you've been enrolled.
140 million passengers arrived at the UK border in 2017, and that's expected to double by 2050. But airports cannot double in size, so they need to process us faster, so we arrive and leave much quicker.
The advantage of this is that passengers can choose to use it, and if they are low risk and eligible, that's to say you can come through without too much examination, then they can go through and not stop. They can just keep walking, whereas the rest of the passengers who have to be seen can go to the normal control.
The security of our data has never been under such scrutiny. The designers of Protect insist safeguards are in place and information is encrypted. But other questions remain. What if your battery dies? What if you've brought the wrong smartphone? And can the biometric tunnel be fooled?
We're going to test whether the passport application works, but I'm going to try and trick it with this mask.
The developers say the system is ready for implementation. And the Home Office says it continues to investigate the application of new and emerging technologies at UK borders.
We're just going to see, I'm hoping it didn't recognise me.
That's right.
It's a big negative.
None of us like to queue, even though we're so good at it. But are we ready to replace them with a hassle-free, biometric future? Simon Browning, BBC News.
Gosh, isn't that interesting? Now, few places have experienced the effects of climate change as vividly as the Arctic. In Finnmark, at the northernmost tip of Norway, the warmer temperatures pose a challenge for indigenous Sami reindeer herders. But one solution may make things even worse, as our correspondent James Cook has been finding out.
A Sami chief at the top of the world. Niels Mathisera herds reindeer like his ancestors before him. But now the chief and his daughter are worried about the future, a copper mine which they say will disrupt their animals and damage the environment.
This is life-changing. If this mine becomes a reality, that makes the chance of survival impossible, both economically and mentally. At my age, we can manage somehow, but the young, they're in a dark, dark time.
But exploration is already underway. The Norwegian government has approved the mine, and the minister in charge says the need for copper outweighs the disruption it will bring.
It's true that the Arctic is beautiful, but for us, for Norwegians, it's also a place where we actually live. And if the world doesn't have more copper, we won't be able to build more windmills, won't be able to have the huge shift to electrical cars, for example, that we need.
The government says marine life here will be protected by strict environmental standards.
This is only half size when they grow up.
But for the fishermen in the fjord where the mine's debris will be dumped, those assurances do not hold water.
If they start mining, we cannot eat the crab if we can catch it. But I think all the crab will die in this area.
There was a mine here once before, but that was many years ago, and it too divided opinion. This time, the boss argues that his company will revitalise an area that's been struggling economically.
We estimate that the mining itself, with people working every day at site, so contractor and us, will be about 150 employees. And then there will be additional employees in the society, teachers, kindergarten, etc.
But for the Sami reindeer herders, that does not sound like a future full of promise.
It's like they are just taking more and more lands. It's mining, it's power lines, it's wind power. We are so attached to lands and nature, and when you just cut that contact, what's left?
The fight for this land and this fjord may be a taste of what's to come for all of us, as the world realises that shifting to new technology to tackle climate change does come with a cost. James Cook, BBC News, Finnmark in Norway.
Healing from the impact of colonial trauma is an ongoing challenge for many Indigenous communities around the world. In the United States, a Native American wellness movement is encouraging Indigenous people to reconnect with their ancestral practices to tackle health issues like diabetes, alcoholism and drug use.
Our ancestors had it right, and for thousands of years they were in good health, they lived a long time, they were in tune and in harmony with the earth, and it was only until recent history when that got interrupted, now we are trying to restore that.
My name is Chelsea Luger, and I'm one of the co-founders of Well for Culture, which is a Native American or Indigenous wellness initiative.
It's a part of the larger, already existing Native wellness movement, the movement to reclaim Indigenous identity and to address historical trauma, to heal utilizing the practices of our ancestors.
Our mission is also to improve health and well-being in Native American communities. We suffer from high rates of health disparities. So through Well for Culture, we hope to find a way to help our community members reconnect to their own health and wellness mission. We connect culture with wellness. So we travel around the United States and Canada to First Nations and Native American communities, and we offer workshops and trainings on healthy lifestyle practices. We have a concept called the Earth Gym, which basically means that anywhere you go, you can work out with the land. All you need is your body and a connection to the land where you come from. So we do what's called an intertribal fitness meetup, and it's always open to all people, whether you're native or not. So you will see babies at an intertribal fitness meetup, or you will see elderly people, and we make sure that there's something for everyone.
It's creating that bigger community, and it's showing our indigenous people that it's possible and that it's easily accessible.
So Native country is very diverse. When we go and we bring wealth for culture trainings to different communities, it's like a template that they can insert their specific teachings or their specific food or their specific languages into it. So we've experienced a disproportionate amount of trauma in our community. So the Native wellness movement is about healing that.
Eating real food from the earth is paramount to a healthy lifestyle. And many of those foods have been taken out of our communities, and we no longer have access to those foods. And so we promote what's called tribal food sovereignty, which is reconnecting to the earth and reclaiming these foods that are so healthy for us that were once a part of our everyday life.
So this is sustainably sourced bison. This is very important. This is an ancestral food.
We are using our resources to put out a better and a more active, a more healthy image of Native people.
And that's it for now. There's plenty more on our top stories, the fires in the Amazon and the G7 at BBC News Online. Thanks for watching.
Hello there, it's continuing to hot up across many parts of Europe over the next few days. A lot of places are still going to be dry and quite sunny. The weather has been more changeable across the UK, but it's settling down here. We've still got some clouds spinning its way across northernmost parts of Europe, and those storm clouds still there into the weekend across parts of Italy, heading towards the Alps, into the Balkans, and perhaps drifting a little bit further north as well. Towards the southeast of Europe, it remains dry. It's going to be quite hot. There'll be lots of strong sunshine around as well. Those storms, though, not just affecting the Apennines, but possibly affecting Corsica and Sardinia. And we've got dry weather and plenty of strong sunshine across Iberia. That warmth is pushing its way into France, heading northwards into the UK as well. We've got some wetter weather coming into coastal areas of Norway, and that rain should be moving away from the Baltic states to arrive just to the north of Moscow. Those storms, though, we need to keep an eye on those. They could be drifting their way northwards into Germany, perhaps through Austria and into Poland as well. So the threat of some storms over the next few days, but many places are still going to be dry. Hot for a while longer in Paris, the heat ebbing away in London. We could see some storms arriving in Madrid as well as not too far from Rome. Very warm, I think, in that sunshine in Berlin. Temperatures also into the low 30s in Athens.
I'm Catty Kay in Washington.
I'm Christian Fraser in London.
Let's start with
the European Union, Brexit,
Russian interference,
Donald Trump's Twitter feed.
We'll
move on.
I think there are going to be a lot of questions now.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be fascinating to watch.
We're nearly out of time.
This is a big deal.
Beyond 100 Days on BBC World News.
For every film that gets made, there's one person who's in charge, the producer.
Do you know what a producer does?
Produces the movie, right? Chooses a director. I'm not sure, but I believe that's what he does.
The supervisor of the movie, so to speak, yeah.
Like I don't know.
I think some of those guys just forget producer credits as favors and whatnot. I think that's how the industry works. Other than that, I'm not sure what he does.
Most people couldn't name 3 producers, you know? You ask them and they'll start naming directors. Like they just don't understand the difference. So because I'm a producer, I can have my hand in a lot of different types of things. And for some people, so many projects that they've enjoyed, that they like, oh, you did that, you produced that as well. And I think people are just now paying more attention to who it is that's behind the content. There's more of an interest in that.
In Ukraine's vast exclusion zone, cut off after the world's worst nuclear disaster, people still live on contaminated land. 33 years on, is it now safe to build a future here? Our world, in the shadow of Chernobyl, on BBC World News.
Many in Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement are pushing for more peaceful protests. The city's leader has promised some form of dialogue, and yet with so much mistrust here, everybody's bracing for yet more violent street clashes. Join me, Stephen McDonald, for special coverage of Hong Kong's political crisis here on BBC World News.
Hello, this is BBC World News, the headlines. Brazil's president has ordered the military to help fight the devastating fires in the Amazon rainforest. Jair Bolsonaro said wildfires shouldn't be used as an excuse for international sanctions. President Trump has announced further increases to trade tariffs against China. In a series of angry tweets, he said a planned 25% tax on billions of dollars of Chinese goods would be increased to 30% from October. A worker at Britain's consulate in Hong Kong who was detained by the Chinese authorities has been released. Simon Cheng went missing earlier this month during a business trip to mainland China. The South Korean military says that North Korea has fired 2 short-range missiles from its east coast into the sea. Japan said the launches were a clear violation of UN resolutions and couldn't be ignored.
Now on BBC World News, hard-hitting interviews and documentaries from around the world. Newsnight with stories making the news this week.
Tensions in Hong Kong as China charges a British consulate employee with security offences. We're in Hong Kong as the Chinese authorities ratchet up the pressure.
This is about Hong Kong becoming the kind of place where people disappear.
Environmentalists are in uproar as the Amazon rainforest burns. We ask how this happened and what's the significance? Also on the programme, he took his own life, but the many victims of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking and abuse have to live with his crimes. We speak to Epstein's former attorney, the law professor Alan Dershowitz.